Zhang Weili entered the consciousness of MMA fans worldwide after her incredible belt-earning knockout over Jessica Andrade. She would then go on to successfully defend her title in what is now looked back on as one of the greatest title fights of all time. She is seen as one of the most well-rounded fighters in the division, and yet the fights she is most well known for were almost completely absent of any grappling whatsoever. At the time of this recording, Zhang is expected to rematch the current champ Rose Namajunas very soon. Considering her defeat by way of knockout in their first fight, Weili may choose to utilize the other aspects of her game in the rematch and test the champion on the ground. This raises the question, how good is Zhang Weili's grappling? What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Fight Dialogue. My name is Tim, so I'm going to be breaking down the grappling skills of Zhang Weili. And full disclaimer, a lot of the fights that I had to analyze were pre-UFC, so that played a major part in how I formulated my opinions for this analysis. In order to analyze her skills, I'm going to look at 6 key elements of grappling as they relate to the sport of MMA. I give each category a score based on a scale from 1 to 10, and then at the end of the video, I take the average of those scores to give an overall grade. I base these scores off my own observations of their most recent fights of relevance and the quality of the opponents that they have faced. Since every fight begins standing, let's start with takedown defense. The first thing that jumped out at me right away when I started to analyze Zhang is that she is extremely confident in her striking skills. She comes forward quickly and aggressively, and that of course is not a bad thing, but depending on who she's fighting, it could at times be something that hinders her ability to stay standing. Her height and reach is a little bit on the short side for her weight class, which forces her to bully her way into the pocket or the clinch in order to land effectively. She normally does a fantastic job of doing just that, but against grapplers that can hold their own on the feet and are adamant about securing a takedown, this can work against her. Weili oftentimes ends up getting body locked when she starts landing those big shots, and is sometimes put on the ground as a result. This weakness is a lot easier to exploit in theory than in practice, because like I mentioned before, Zhang will throw devastating combinations and heavy knees from close range. She has a strong offensive wrestling game that also does a great job of hindering her opponent's offense, which I'll take a look at later in the video. The other weakness I see in Weili's takedown defense is similar to the last, but has proven to be a bit more reliable for the person standing across the cage from her. Weili loves to throw low kicks and body kicks, which can be caught and used to get her down. This can be said for most fighters that throw a lot of kicks though, so I'm not going to dwell on that too much. Her basic knowledge of positioning and fundamentals are all present. Sprawling, pummeling, as well as leg pummeling. As you can see here, she jockeys for the outside leg position while defending the single leg. No matter where Zhang is on the mat, she has a talent for retreating back to the cage or the ropes whenever she feels like her base is compromised, and using it to stabilize and remain upright. Even when she doesn't have the benefit of the cage wall, it's not easy to get the kazushi on her in open space either. Her natural balance is strong, and even when fighters get in on her hips, the takedown is not guaranteed. With that being said, I do have to mention for the first time, and certainly not the last time in this analysis, that Weili just has not fought a high-level takedown artist in her career yet. Some of her opponents were able to get her in some pretty compromising upright positions, and regardless of the natural talent Zhang possesses, more takedowns should have occurred here. I mean, these takedown attempts were downright pathetic, and some of them actually almost worked. I'm not trying to be overly critical of Zhang or her opponent here, but I have to call it as I see it. Weili Zhang defeated Jessica Andrade quickly and unquestionably, but if that was Andrade in on her hips like that, she would have launched Weili into space. The last thing that I'll say here is that because of Weili's confidence in her striking, it's also a relatively simple task to get her to overcommit to a combination and shoot in under it. So like I said, her fundamentals are solid and her spunkiness is hard to deal with, but it's going to be very difficult for Weili to overcome matchups such as a Carla Esparza type of fighter due to her style and choice of techniques. So for takedown defense, she'll get a 6.75. Next is ground and pound defense. Weili Zhang has actually developed her skills in this category pretty well over the course of her career. In her first ever pro fight against Meng Bo, she actually got bullied quite a bit on the ground, taking a ton of shots, not to mention getting slammed on her head 2 or 3 times while going for arm bars. I don't think anyone has tried to slam her since then, so I really can't say if she's improved in that department specifically, but if not, it's definitely something she has to watch out for. Going for submissions is a good way to deter ground strikes, but if you're in danger of being slammed, you need to let it go. Since that fight, she has made vast improvements to her defense here, adopting a very high guard in most cases, which is a way to modify the closed guard by bringing the legs up higher on the shoulders of an opponent. It helps break the posture of the attacker and also helps set up submissions from the bottom, which is something that Weili loves to do, like I mentioned. One thing that I find impressive about her defense off of her back is that I don't think I've actually ever seen her in any other positions on the bottom besides the closed and open guard. It goes to show that she has the presence of mind to always land in the guard as a last resort if she's being taken down, and also that it's not easy to break her guard open. Typically when a fighter is having difficulties opening their opponent's guard from a kneeling position, it incentivizes them to stand up and try to pass their open guard. Zhang forces this scenario pretty often and will use that opportunity to push kick away and stand up, or get stood up by the ref by causing a stalemate. The most notable example of this was against Emi Fujino. You can see that Fujino tries to rotate around Zhang's guard here in order to pass and land strikes. It seems like it's way too simple for that to actually work, but believe it or not, it's not as difficult as you may think. The person standing up is significantly more mobile than the person on the floor for obvious reasons. If a fighter puts their feet on the ground in order to shrimp to a hip or square up, they are briefly lowering their legs, which is the only thing keeping their attacker at bay. Notice here how Zhang rotates without the use of her arms or legs to stay squared up with Fujino. This is actually a drill you'll see done in some jiu-jitsu schools. It's a great way to retain open guard and force a stand-up. Weili is actually one of the only fighters I've seen do this technique efficiently in MMA. The up kicks that she threatens with from those positions, as well as the rest of the strikes she throws from her back, do an excellent job of keeping her opponents honest and distracting them from their offensive ambitions. I must point out though that Weili hasn't really fought a ground and pound specialist yet, so I'd be very interested to see how she holds up against one. With all that taken into account, I'll give Zhang the score of 8 for this category. The last element of defense to focus on is submission defense. I didn't actually find a plethora of data to analyze here, but I'll do my best with what I have. So first of all, I will say that Weili Zhang has never lost a fight via submission. That doesn't tell us much, but it is worth noting for a career that spanned 23 fights to date. The actual examples I found of Weili having to fight her way out of submissions were brief, and most of them half-heartedly applied, I would say, being used more as a deterrent to Zhang's offense rather than a legitimate attempt to win the fight. Still, I can definitely give her some credit for these guillotine escapes. The guillotine is a fairly simple technique to set up and apply, but can be very tricky to defend. Zhang did so without ever missing a stride in her advance, leaning towards the far side with one arm over the top and popping her head out as her opponent tried to adjust. She was also caught in a pretty deep armbar at one point. I could take points away for her submission awareness here because she definitely didn't seem prepared for it. But she is very aggressive with strikes on the ground, and an armbar is a very reliable counter to that, so I don't exactly fault her in this situation. What worries me though is that she does exactly what you're taught not to do in defense of an armbar, which is pulling straight up with the arm outstretched. Weili didn't even have her other hand in play to help protect, and against a skilled submission artist like her future opponent, this would have been a wrap. She does clasp her hands together eventually and frees herself with a pretty violent slam. Not the most elegant or technical of escapes, but I suppose it got the job done. The thing that I definitely need to give Zhang some praise for in this category is the emphasis she puts into passing the guard. No matter how wild she gets with her ground and pound, she is always simultaneously looking to advance her position and escape the guard. Passing the guard is something that I usually talk about in the offensive categories, but in Zhang's case, it works out for her defensively because most of the submissions she has been threatened with were applied from within an opponent's guard. Once she passes, it nullifies a ton of opportunities her foes might use to catch her in some type of hold. It seems like there is less effort put into passing guard in modern MMA, probably because the ground and pound options are mostly the same, if not better, from within a person's full guard, and the half guard especially. The defensive aspects of passing the guard are largely ignored, but as you can see, not by Zhang. Unfortunately, her technique, or the lack thereof, that she has shown when forced to escape pretty simple attacks from lower tier fighters has hurt her on the scoreboard a bit. So for submission defense, I'm giving her a 6.75. Allow me to now transition to the offensive part of the analysis. Let's begin with Weili's takedown offense. Weili Zhang is an expert in the Chinese martial art of Sanda. A a sadly underappreciated art form. Surprising given that it's China's national combat sport. Sanda is very similar to kickboxing, but with an added emphasis on trips, throws, and kick catching. You can see how this would transfer over very well into MMA, and it is the core of Zhang's overall skill set. The Sanda wrestling curriculum is masterfully displayed by Zhang, as you will see her time and again finding success with inside and outside trips. She generates a ton of offense from the clinch, and both trips are readily available to her there, especially after she sets it up with some nasty elbows and knees. She will mix in other techniques when the situation calls for it, but her bread and butter are the trips without a doubt. Her natural athleticism plays a part in her takedown ability as well. Constantly pushing the pace non-stop grants her some easy takedowns in the later stages of the fights. She doesn't really have much of a cage wrestling game. Most of her success has taken place in open mat scenarios, so I would like to see her develop a bit more in regards to her cage takedowns. There are fighters that are masters of using the cage to stay upright, and I'd be interested to see how she fares against them. I'm confident in my assessment regarding her trips and throws from the center of the octagon though. Her gifts in the striking and clinching departments provide her so many opportunities to ground an opponent, making her a takedown threat even against the elite grapplers of the division. And speaking of her talents for striking, as I so often point out in these videos, a powerful strike, or in Wei Li's case, a barrage of them, works just as well as any takedown. So for this category, she scores an 8.25. Time to go over what is easily the most important part of Zhang's grappling game: ground and pound offense. I've been following Zhang's career ever since her first fight in the UFC, where she displayed a pretty strong competency in this skill set from the top position. In her second fight against Aguilar, she further impressed me by securing an armbar after setting it up with some devastating elbow strikes from the bottom. Neither one of those fights were sufficient enough preparation for what I was about to see when I looked up her earlier career fights. Zhang Weili absolutely annihilated most of her pre-UFC opponents with ground and pound of some measure. From the guard, from the mount, from the back, even from side control to my surprise. Side mount is a fantastic position to be in from the top, giving excellent control and numerous submission options. But when it comes to providing opportunities to strike, it's mediocre at best. In order to truly control somebody there, the top person needs to have their chest glued to their opponent. If you posture up to strike, it relieves that pressure and gives up an avenue of escape for the bottom fighter. Wei Li maintains control here and still lands heavy shots because she pressures down on the diaphragm of her opponents with her lower arm or her hip, and utilizes elbow strikes with the higher arm. The use of elbows lessens the amount of posturing she needs to commit to in order to land hard shots. She ends up in side control not by chance but by virtue of a very aggressive passing game. Zhang has a sixth sense about when to open up with vicious combinations, and can sense when an opponent is exhausted, mentally broken, or hurt. Match all of that with her ability to inflict damage from the bottom with brutal elbows and powerful up kicks, and what you get is the best ground and pound offense I've ever seen from a female fighter. One of the best I've seen from any fighter. The only thing stopping me from giving her a perfect score is that there have been a few scant occasions where she got a little overzealous with it and got swept or reversed. That and her grapple boxing is still untested against the elites of the division. But considering how badly she clobbered so very many of her opponents, she will earn the score of 9.5. Last but not least, we come upon submission offense. Weili Zhang has a total of 7 career wins by submission to date. So let's take a look at some of them, shall we? Out of those 7 submissions, we can see that she clearly prefers the rear naked choke and the armbar, and it's easy to see why. They are very commonly obtainable from the 2 positions Weili finds herself in very often, while utilizing her ground strikes, the mount and the back mount. Zhang knows her craft and is more than happy to soften opponents up with heavy strikes, causing her opponents to panic and relinquish a submission. She's very patient when hunting the submission and will focus on control alone if need be to eventually sink in the choke, or to efficiently swing into an arm lock. I must say though, for submissions that she is supposedly very practiced in, she tends to skip a few steps when she's dealing with a game opponent. Trying to muscle through chokes and failing is a sin that many fighters are guilty of. But to not control the wrist while going for an armbar. Zhang has shown a little bit of variety in her game, at least, with one victory via guillotine, and some half-decent attempts at triangles, arm triangles, and neck cranks. 7 submission wins is impressive, but with a little bit more submission diversity and some polish on her go-to moves, it could really elevate her submission threat to a superb level. For now though, she'll get a 7.5. When the scores are tallied up and I take the average, it gives Zhang Weili the total grade of about 7.8 overall. Not too shabby for a fighter who has mostly been showing off her striking skills lately. Her overall ground game is carried just a little bit by her incredible ground and pound skills, but she's still young and talented and is more than capable of improving in the areas that she is lacking. Her scheduled opponent and the current champ is no slouch on the ground either, but maybe it's high time that Weili brushed off this area of her skill set once more. She may be able to replicate her success from the past and take home gold once again. So that just about does it for this episode of How Good Is Their Grappling. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video so you can see where Zhang ranks amongst the other grapplers that I've analyzed. Check out the Patreon and the channel memberships. It'll help me pump out more videos like this more often. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, and thanks so much for watching. Take care.